All right, good evening, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started if that's good with you, Colin. Awesome. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining our GT Awareness Week Parent Webinar. I am Paulina Van Eden Hill, the Executive Director of the Texas Association for the Gifted and Talented, or TAGT. TAGT exists to connect and empower parents and educators to meet the unique needs of gifted individuals through awareness, advocacy, and action. Today, we're so excited to host you and hundreds of GT parents from all around the state and the nation. And by state, I mean the great state of Texas. We know this is a very trying time for you and are grateful you've chosen to bring us into your home tonight. Even though we're remote, take a minute to imagine yourself surrounded by this community who are all in the same boat as you. Hopefully, you feel connected and empowered to this group. In response to this pandemic and all the school closures, we've collected dozens of school closure resources for parents and educators and posted them on our website, txgifted.org. We've also hosted several Facebook Live sessions and will continue to host these with renowned GT leaders that can be found and watched anytime on our Facebook page under videos. We hope you find something helpful, encouraging, and meaningful in these resources. TAGT is a membership organization made up of nearly 4,000 parents, educators, and administrators. As we face these challenging times, advocating for your students, providing quality learning opportunities, and building a connected community are all possible because of our dedicated membership. We invite you to join TAGT as an e-subscriber or TAGT member for continued up-to-date information and resources, legislative issues and alerts, webinars, events, and other news. Please consider joining this organization. Okay, before we begin, a few housekeeping items. Please post any questions you have for Colin in the Q&A box below. Also, if you have any technical issues or need assistance from our team, please use the chat. Now on to our feature presentation. Colin Seale was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, where struggles in his upbringing gave birth to his passion for educational equity. Tracked early into gifted and talented programs, Colin was afforded opportunities his neighborhood peers were not. Using lessons from his experience as a math teacher, later an attorney, and now a keynote speaker, contributor to Forbes, The 74, The Education Post, and author of Thinking Like a Lawyer, a framework for teaching critical thinking to all students, published by Proof Rock Press this year, Colin founded ThinkLaw, a multi-award-winning organization to help educators leverage inquiry-based instructional strategies to close the critical thinking gap and ensure they teach and reach all students, regardless of race, zip code, or what side of the poverty line they're born into. When he's not serving as the world's most fervent critical thinking advocate, Colin proudly serves as the world's greatest entertainer to his two young children and his loving wife, Carrie. Please welcome Colin.
All right, thank you all so much. I'm just going to share my screen real quick and then we'll get going here. As Paulina mentioned, really excited that you all are taking the time during this really unprecedented time to connect, to build, to grow. And as a gifted child myself, as a gifted learner myself, it's so powerful for me to spend this time connecting with parents because I know when my mom was growing up or raising me, she didn't really have these resources. So as we're getting started, for those of you that love to tweet and engage on social media, you can follow me on Twitter at ThinkLawUS or at Colin E. Seale, on Instagram, ThinkLawUS, or just Colin Seale without the E, or you could just like us on Facebook and leave your comments or any questions, ideas you have there. But really excited that we're here talking about a really interesting conversation that I don't think we really bring up enough in gifted education, which is this idea of full potential and reconsidering this idea around success. So Paulina mentioned this, and for those of you that might not be able to stick around the whole time or that are looking for opportunities to dig deeper, my Thinking Like a Lawyer book that is already like at the warehouse, so you can order on Amazon or through Proofread Press's website. It does really give a lot of strategies that are fleshed out in much more detail than I'm talking about today. So you can feel free to get that as an opportunity to dig deeper. But before we go any further, before we actually dive into content, I want to think about this question that I ask at the start of so many workshops for educators, but I want to think about it from the mindset of you as parents. And as parents, what I want you to do is actually put some of your answers in the chat box when it comes to this question. And the question is, if you had a magic wand, I'm talking about literal unlimited resources, you can figure out any future imaginable. What kind of future would you want for your kids? What would you want to see on that other side when you think about like what it means for your kids? I'm seeing this idea of happiness come in. A lot of times I hear this idea of like, you know, I want my kids to be able to like find something that they're passionate about and go further. Being kind more and more often. Parents are talking about being kind, content, anything they dream of. And when we start listening to these responses, right, making a difference, financial stability, also known as please don't be on my couch at 35 years old. There's all these things that we think about for our kids, and we might not necessarily name it explicitly a lot, but we know we think it. And I want to share a little bit about my personal story to kind of walk through why this conversation matters to me so much. I had the experience of getting to the point where I recognized potential really has no part, no business being in our vocabulary, whether we're talking about parents or as educators or anyone. We really should not be talking about kids' potential. And here's what kind of made me think this way. So this is a picture of me when I was in elementary school. You can probably take a look at this picture and see that my 90s sweater game was pretty on point. I'm not exactly sure what was going on, but I had some of the highest high waters in human history, but it's all good. And when I think about this class in particular, this gifted and talented class that I started to be in elementary school in Brooklyn, New York, I look at this and I remember there were so many conversations around the potential of this group that was so exclusive. We had access to this like separate and unequal education within my own school building, where only 12 kids per grade level had access to this phenomenal educational experience. And we were told over and over again, you've got so much potential, so much potential. And by the time I was in 8th grade, I remember feeling like I was so close to fulfilling whatever this promise was. I was double accelerated in multiple subjects. I was involved in like musical theater. I was National Honor Society, all these things seemed to make sense. And then something switched. As soon as I got to high school, it's like, I just stopped caring. And this struggle with I don't care syndrome, where I stopped taking classes seriously, I stopped doing my homework, all I could ever hear is like, if you don't straighten up and fly right, like you'll never reach your potential. Every parent teacher conference, well, Colin has so much potential, so much potential. And I started really thinking about this idea of potential. And I want to like stop for a second, because as I've seen all these different responses flow in, it makes me wonder that definition of success that we are saying we imagine for our children, like kindness, great relationships, making a difference, like all these things that we actually are putting out there that we believe deep in our hearts that this is what it means for our kids to make it. Do our kids know this? Do we ever communicate that to them? Because if we really think about it, if we really think about most messages we're sending either implicitly or explicitly, success looks a lot more like this. Are they exceptional? Are they winning the medals? Are they coming in first place in the spelling bee or the UIL competition? And there's this idea that like we're pushing towards finding the correct answer. If we could check off enough boxes, and like, I want to be real with you. This does have a place. Like, let's not kid ourselves. GPAs in many ways do help determine access and opportunity. When you start thinking about like being able to get college paid for and being able to like show a very competitive package of what you have. But I want to stop for a second because this is the only message our kids are hearing. And we actually believe deep in our hearts that this is not the case. Maybe we need to stop and be a lot more clear about what our messages ought to be about. So, is this what success is? Getting that degree, getting that white lab coat? Or might it look a little bit different? Might success look like your child starting up the next big thing in the garage? Maybe it is something like, I don't know, figuring out a way in sub-Saharan Africa to have a waterless toilet that can cut down on endless amounts of disease and infestation. So when we start thinking about like what success could be, a really pivotal moment in my life was graduating from the specialized high school and becoming like a computer science major at Syracuse University and being student body president, and got my degree in computer science, and I threw it all away to be a math teacher. Right? Like the way that I was raised as a first generation immigrant in Brooklyn, New York, whose mom, I grew up as a kid that was on free and reduced lunch. I grew up where my father was incarcerated for selling drugs. So much potential, but because we're using this word potential, this idea of me becoming a math teacher in Washington, D.C. doesn't really seem like I'm fulfilling my potential. Doesn't really seem like a typical success story. Even though when I look at the gains that I had with Anthony, and I think about the transformative impact of education, I don't know that I've ever felt more successful. But put that aside for a second, and let's think about going a little bit deeper into this question of what does it mean even to talk about full potential? Well, let's start by actually just breaking down the reality, just the basic facts. Potential is a fixed notion. Potential is what motivates some people to say like, you know what, this kid right here, fine, because they exceeded whatever notion of potential seemed appropriate. For a kid like me, like graduating from college and getting a good job is like making it to the extreme. And there's a book that I would recommend that sort of walks through this problem when it comes to gifted learners in particular. And this book really talks about this idea that we have these amazing challenges our kids are looking at, right? Like what we're seeing some of them right now, some of the complications related to this pandemic, but like think about the world, the role of artificial intelligence and automation and nanotechnology. The reality is we can't keep on living in a world where success means that our gifted children play it safe. They get a good job. Right? They get a good job at like the engineering firm or the law firm, or they're like a really well-paid like doctor. And look, I am never gonna sit here and like wag my finger because someone who was the first generation in their family to go to college now has like a really solid income for the rest of their lives. Like never that. Right? I'm always gonna say like, yes, that's a step in the right direction. And is it enough to just be a doctor? Or do we need them to be the innovators who fix a system that is fundamentally broken? Is it really enough for them to just have a successful job at a big firm? Or do we need them to be the revolutionaries that push society to just advance our mindset of what is fair and what is just? Are we running on a treadmill or are we moving forward? And part of what this book argues, part of the challenge around full potential is that we can't just put so much of a premium on achievement to the point where our kids are afraid to fail. We need to make failure part of the process. And when I start really digging into this, it's hard to not be personal about it. These are my children, Rose and Oliver. Rose is 7, Oliver is 4. Now, the thing about Rose and Oliver is that they've got some big dreams. They've got some really, really big dreams. So when Oliver tells me that when he gets older, what he wants to do is to A, eat all the food, which I presume he's capable of. He has quite the appetite. But the second thing he wants you to do is he wants to make sure like no one goes hungry and no one doesn't have a home. So for Oliver, the idea of ending homelessness is his obsession. It's the thing that he cares about. It's the thing that for whatever reason makes him sort of wake up in the morning. Rose basically wants to do every profession that's ever made. She wants to be a teacher, a dancer, a singer. She wants to do all those things. But her big why, her overarching why, is she wants to make sure that discrimination no longer exists. She cannot stand discrimination. She gets so angry every time we read a story where people are treated unfairly because of who they are. And far be it from me to say that she cannot do that. So as we start thinking about reimagining full potential, I want to get to this point where there's an education evangelist at Google. There's a phrase that he uses all the time that I think is a very powerful one to think about. And it's something that I wrote about in my column for Forbes because he lives here in Phoenix with me. And I had a chance to sit down with him a few months ago to talk about like this thing he says all the time, which is something I think is very powerful for all of you. Stop asking your kids what they want to be when they grow up. Stop asking it. What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? Instead of asking that question, ask them, what problem do you want to solve? Because when you ask kids what problem they want to solve, and then you invoke this spirit, this energy for them to get the skills and knowledge they need to solve that problem, it kind of changes the conversation around what it means to be successful. One of the things that he shared is that a lot of times people come to him all the time and be like, oh, how do I get a job at Google? How do I get a job at Google? His response, don't work at Google. Make your own damn Google. Why do you set the bar so low? Who's to say you don't have that next big idea? It's got to come from somewhere, and guess what? We need it. If you look around at our world, if you look around at the complications that we have, nobody is doing better because gifted kids are playing it safe. No, we need them unleashed, which means that full potential word has got to go. Jay-Z is one of my favorite rappers, very biased being from Brooklyn, but he has this song called So Ambitious. And I think that this really speaks to an intersection because when you're gifted, when you're in a minority population, when you're growing up in poverty and in the struggle, a lot of times when you have a tremendous talent and ability, the idea of talking big, the idea of thinking big and having a big imagination is often shot down. I can tell you that, like, I remember when I started Think Law, right? I had been a teacher, I had worked at a very prominent law firm. And when I left and started to do this, like, I couldn't dare tell my immigrant mom that, like, I'm no longer at the big firm. Because I started this thing where we're teaching critical thinking using legal cases to kids and fairy tales to nursery rhymes to younger kids. Because this idea is like, you might not make it. It might not be, like, you might not be successful. You might not make it. And he heard that a lot. Jay-Z heard that a lot when he started his rap career and his uncles and his community. It's like, yo, don't you know kids in this neighborhood don't make it? Like, you're gonna really get hurt out there with these big dreams. And what he said is something that I think is a powerful message for this conversation as well, which is, I'm different. I'm not gonna base what I'm gonna be off of what everybody isn't. So it doesn't matter to me that, like, no one could do this and no one could do that. Like, I don't have to play by those rules. All those rules presume the notion of fixed potential is real, but it's not. And those fixed notions actually hurt kids with the least. So let's break and shatter that conversation around full potential. Let's take that off the map. Let's stop using that in our vocabulary altogether so that we can focus on what really matters, making that mind switch away from this. And I realize you can't just say these big things without actually having some substance to go with it. So when I get into the substance right now, I want to really share two concrete ideas that can help us go beyond potential. So as we start to do this, as we move to this second point around meritocracy, I want to really drive home why this idea of, like, working hard getting good grades and really just achieving is not as important as we might make it out to be, okay? So how many times have we heard this phrase? Just pull yourself up from your bootstraps. Right? Just work hard, just work hard, just do your work and push yourself and pull yourself up in the bootstraps. And it's like, all right, this presumes this notion of meritocracy. This presumes that meritocracy is a real thing. This idea that like, if you work hard and you're very talented and very smart, you move ahead because of your achievements. Now, I imagine that some people that are on this call at some point in their life may have had a boss. Some people that are on this call at some point in your life might have had a boss that forced you to scratch your head and say, he or she seems to not be all that bright, but somehow they're the boss. Somehow they're in this position. And there is no greater moment for us to recognize the shenanigans involved in the myth of meritocracy than what we saw last year with this college admissions scandal. I wrote a whole piece about this, about, Aunt Becky and Felicity Huffman, and like this idea that like they paid so much and got people doing like fake tests and lying to say they're on a crew team. I'm gonna tell you, being from my neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, no one was gonna lie and say that I played crew. That wasn't gonna happen. So if we start to unravel this idea around merit, we realize like, that can't be it. That's not it. We're giving our kids the wrong message. And literally, if all we do is set them up to check off the boxes and have the right resumes and the right GPA and the right grades, they're missing a whole nother side of the game that they don't even realize is being played. Listen to me, this is a game. And I don't know. I can presume that most people on this call are not either like Hollywood movie stars or like billionaires. If you are a Hollywood movie star or a billionaire, no offense, you can feel free to support my work in any way you choose. But if you are not, which I presume most of you are not, I want you to really realize that there is another side of the game that has to be mentioned, that has to be discussed. So let's dig into this a little bit. When we talk about jobs, even if your criteria is like, well, just go out there and get a good job, 70% of open positions are not even posted on Career Builder or Monster.com or on LinkedIn. They're not even posted. How do you know that these jobs exist? Well, we've got to recognize there's a game to be played. We got to put ourselves in the game. And there's a couple of things we want to talk about to get there. One of the things I want to talk about is this idea that what's in my head in terms of knowledge and smarts and expertise is not enough. There's another game to be played. There's this idea that so much comes from, honestly, just being a good person, just being kind, being consistent, being reliable, being someone who understands that like it's not just about expertise. Let me tell you, you might have children that are like this. I've certainly been this child myself. I have children that are like this, and I've taught tons of children that are like this. Y'all ever know, is anybody familiar with the well actually kid? The well actually kid also becomes a well actually adult. You say something and somebody's like, well, actually, and you're like, all right, okay, all right, I get it. Now, if we start thinking and looking at in Google, going back to Google, who gets promotions? Who becomes promoted and elevated to the highest levels of management? It's not the best coders necessarily. It's not the people with the most technical proficiency. It's the ones that know how to listen to understand, how to speak to be understood, and how to disagree without being disagreeable. All these so-called soft skills that are super hard to teach matter so much. And one of them that is sort of a blanket piece that we talk about a lot with my work is critical thinking. It's the framework we map out in the Thinking Like a Lawyer book. And it's really the fundamental purpose behind the work that I do, right? Like making sure that we create a world where critical thinking is no longer a luxury good. So to break this down, I want to be clear that like everything I'm saying right now about how it's not just about knowledge, it goes beyond that. It's laid out by this diagram. So yes, there's these critical thinking skills, the ability to analyze and reason and even think about your own thinking, which we call metacognition. But it goes beyond skills. There's also this idea of your critical thinking dispositions. How likely is it that you apply critical thinking throughout life, academics, career? How inquisitive are you? Tell me about your sense of skepticism, right? Your willingness to get to the bottom of it. And what makes this very complicated for kids, for adults, period, is this idea that critical thinking isn't always the same across contexts. It doesn't always transfer. This is why we have young people who would sit there and like write until their hands start hurting, but then complain, I don't do math. Or kids that would pour their blood, sweat, and tears into a fine arts project, but say like, I'm not even gonna attempt a science project. But if we think about this world we're trying to get our kids into, they need to have critical thinking skills and dispositions that go across contexts. So this is where a lot of what I'm talking about to educators, this think law approach, right? To take the same mindset that we do in law school, looking at things from different perspectives, asking questions to get information, making claims and backing it up with evidence, and even really thinking about how to become an expert negotiator by being able to like empathize with other people. This is a powerful set of tools that we can work with our young people, because you never get to the point where you can ask good questions unless you're asked good questions. So as a parent, one of the things that we can help us push beyond full potential is to get our kids in the habit of asking good questions by modeling it ourselves. I know grocery stores are kind of treacherous right now, right? So I don't recommend you taking your families on a grocery store run right now to model the activities in this, right? You're not going to hold me liable for that nonsense. But when things go back to normal and you are in a checkout line, there's a lot of magazines that have some questions on them, right? Like, does God care who wins the Super Bowl? That's an interesting question to pose. Does Hillary really have 6 months to live? Doesn't seem like the most credible source, but whatever. There's a lot of questions to be asked. If we start thinking about the signs that we see as we're driving down the street or just navigating our communities, like, why would they double the traffic fines in work zones? Why in the world does somebody think that spinning a sign on a corner is gonna make me think, maybe I should get my taxes done? Maybe there's something to this, but there's questions that we should ask to get there. When we are in the grocery store, one of the things that I love doing, and this is a workshop that I do for parents that's called Why is the Milk in the Back of the Supermarket, is asking questions about these regular sorts of ideas of like, why is the milk in the back of the supermarket? Everyone needs milk. We know we're gonna use milk. Like, why would they put it all the way in the back? And maybe some kids would say like, well, you know, I guess like you end up buying a lot more things if they put it in the back. Or there's a less cynical answer around like, well, the trucks come into the back of the grocery store and then, you know, they take the cold cart, and it's probably just safer to put it right into the cold area versus going through the entire supermarket. Like, I don't know if I'll buy that, but it doesn't matter. We're getting into the habit of asking questions. Every time you check out, what does the cashier say to you? Did you find everything okay? Why do they say that? Why do they say that? Because when they say that, like, they realize, you know what? I couldn't find this one thing. I was looking for it. And then the person that does the bags will run and go get it. How much money do they make in a given day by asking that question, right? So we can train our kids to start to like seeing all the questions in our universe. And the thing about those questions is maybe one time you're going to strike that right chord. And right there, that one question is going to be the thing that your child is going to realize is his or her problem to solve. So instead of asking, what do you want to be when you grow up? They'll have a commitment to the problem because you took the time to ask the questions. And now they're learning the process of being able to ask these questions of themselves. So I don't want to bring up like a cliche, you know, this is kind of like, you know, the whole Spider-Man movie, you know, with great power comes great responsibility, but there is something about being highly intelligent. There is like almost like a bigger picture responsibility around like being highly intelligent. And I think about this in the context of two responses from, icons in the business in reference to what we're going through right now, right? So Bill Gates is talking about this, and um, in his own way, using HTML code, talking about working from home. All right. And then we got this other dude, Elon Musk, who is essentially coming up with a 5 or 6 year old response. This panic is dumb. And that might not sound like a big deal to a lot of folks. But go back to your answer. So many of you earlier said like kindness is an outcome you want to see for your kids. And I think about this a lot. Like my daughter, she skipped over the first grade, very, very clever. And I remember one day I was doing dishes, okay? Doing dishes, no big deal. And I'm like, hey, Rose, can you pass me the cup that's on the table so I could put it in the dishwasher? Daddy, I don't see a cup. And I'm like, oh, what are you talking about? I'm like, Rose, like the cup is right there. Can you pass me the cup? And she's like, Daddy, like I don't see a cup. I see a glass though. Look, I turn off the sink and I'm like, look, I'm gonna tell you something. You are not gonna be one of those kids that are gonna sit here, know exactly what I'm talking about, find some minor technicality, and then try to make me feel stupid about it when you know what I'm talking about. Like, no, you do stuff like that, you're not gonna have any friends. And I realized at that point that a lot of what I'm speaking about around critical thinking is incomplete. It's incomplete to just say that the goal is to teach these skills and dispositions across context. We also have to be explicit. If we want our kids to get to that point where they're going further, where they've got that extra edge, they've got to be the ones that understand that doing right is more important than being right. They can't be so obsessed with the right answer that they don't realize that like there's a right way to do it that goes beyond the right answer. People matter, like feelings matter, like outcomes matter. The impact on other people beyond me matters. We want kindness. This is what it looks like. This is what it looks like when it all comes together. So let's make sure we talk about this. Let's make sure that we are explicit about this in our conversations with kids, because it's not just about doing right versus being right. It's also this idea that like smart people don't necessarily have influence, especially in today's time. Like, let's be real. How often do we see we're not listening to smart people? We're not listening to the scientists. We're not listening. When you think about this idea of what it takes to persuade people to stay home, we realize that being smart isn't enough. And to some extent, I blame this on intellectuals. Because let's be real, too many of our kids never get the lesson that doing right is more important than being right. And they're not just smart, they just can't help but to be smart asses at the same time. And we don't want that. That has actually been a huge part of our wave of anti-intellectualism. So how do we get to the point where we start thinking about influence? Well, part of it can be, how do we get our kids to start building empathy? How can we get our kids to be able to put themselves in the situations of people that are impacted by things? So there's always interesting news stories or things that go viral. This idea around like this couple who lost their dog and decided to clone him. That's a funky story. But let's just talk about this. Like, how would a zookeeper feel? So we can go through and talk about how the couple would feel, maybe even imagining how the dog would feel, like, how people in the family might feel about this. But even beyond this, what are the ramifications beyond this? How would a zookeeper feel? What would somebody who does this work as a living, like as a geneticist, how would that person respond to this? If you ran an animal shelter, might there be some challenges of running that shelter that might be a concern of yours? If you're an activist for PETA, like, how do you respond to this? So we start thinking about this, and the real point is we're thinking, we're understanding the consequences of actions and how it impacts other people. Going even further, this value to being kind and to being out there, like we often talk about kids should just learn and be achievers. And a lot of us know this phrase. We say this all the time. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And to some extent, I would say that like that might have been true before, right? It's not what you know, it's who you know. But every stretch of the imagination, with every shred of evidence that I see in today's climate, I think we've got to take this a step further. It's not who you know, it's who knows you. Who knows you? There are people that have been CEOs of multiple companies, and they've never filled out an application for their job, right? They get tapped. Who gets tapped for that committee? Who gets tapped for that like extra special investment you weren't even asking for? Who gets the promotion that wasn't even posted? So what does this mean? It means this is a part of the game we've got to teach. We've got to teach this. We've got to make sure we understand that like networking matters. Networking makes a massive difference. Listen, there was a kid I say kid, he was a grown man, but he graduated from my law school and he was #1 in his class. #1. Okay, I graduated top of my law class too, but he graduated #1. He could not get a job at any of the prominent law firms. He couldn't actually make small talk. And although he was smart, although he would have been a great associate, he would have been a great researcher, nobody wanted to hire someone that you couldn't trust being in a room with clients. So how do we build this? How do we make our children better at networking? Well, let's do one thing. If there's one takeaway when it comes to networking, have your children map out what their network is right now. Figure out like who they actually know, who they're connected to. Build a LinkedIn profile, have a professional setup, and have them think about like, who do I actually know? Who went to the high school in my neighborhood? Maybe it's possible for me to figure out who went to my elementary school. Who do I know in my community? Can I make sure that I know all of my like elected officials? I can meet with them. I can have someone that knows me so that when an opportunity comes up for a really awesome scholarship or a summer program or some sort of internship, they've got me on top of mind. Who knows you matters. Locking yourself in the cave for 6 hours a day so you can have a 6.5 GPA, it's great to some extent, right? There's no question that you achieved and you know what you know. But in the game where it's not about merit alone is not going to get you there. And if you're the person like me who like has no other option but merit without that hookup, you'll be kidding yourself if you don't intentionally seek out merit plus. Merit plus. So if you start thinking about this, and I see a question here, and I think it's relevant because a lot of our kids might not have the best social skills. So it's like, well, what do I do here if my child is an introvert? The coolest thing about networking is it has to be something that's natural. It has to be something that's you. The reality is there are very successful people who are also introverts. There's a certain part of it that's like, almost like I don't do math. I don't care, okay? Like you can't tell me you don't do networking. You gotta figure out a way to do it within a context that works for you. If it means for you, it's gonna be writing a cold email to somebody and seeing if you can like connect for a Zoom meeting or a phone call or whatever have you. If it's, just like writing letters, you gotta find some way to do it. Maybe face-to-face is something you gotta work up to. Maybe you have to model conversations of how to actually like engage in small talk, but it's not negotiable any more than it is to be like, okay, like I just chose not to learn how to read. No, you have to learn how to read, how to do math, and how to network. That's the game, okay? And if we want to talk about shattering that idea of full potential, this has to be a part of it. Because there's no way that innovative idea that comes up in a garage or in a basement or whatever is going to ever translate to real impact without a network. So again, We're challenging this myth of meritocracy. We're making sure that we're intentional about like doing right versus being right, about being influential, thinking about different perspectives, building that empathy and networking. Last but not least, leveraging differences as strengths. So when it comes to potential, I think that sometimes if we go all the way back to like high school physics class, we think about like the hill, right? Like you're on a hill and you have potential energy and you roll down the hill and that's the kinetic, right? So to some extent, when we talk potential, a lot of times it kind of sounds like some people are starting off at different hills. Sometimes you're at a really high hill, sometimes you're at a much lower hill. So that's true. It's true. Some kids go to European vacations every single summer. Some kids go to museums all the time. Right now, we're seeing this play out in real time. We got a ton of kids that are doing like amazing homeschool experiences and whatever. We got other families that are like barely being able to get by. But just because children do not have the same exact experience or opportunities doesn't mean that that's not okay. It's okay. Our kids don't actually need to have the same exact opportunities. What we need to understand is that the uniqueness of our situations, what makes us different is what makes us strong. I can tell you that for years, I used to be super embarrassed of my upbringing. I would never talk about growing up in poverty. I would never even mention that my dad was incarcerated. I would be so embarrassed to bring up a point in my life when 9 people lived with my grandmother in this 1-bedroom apartment. So you look at this, right? Like, and I'm like, you know, what was my life like here? I wasn't going on European vacations. I lived in Brooklyn. Our vacations were in Manhattan, right? Like, but at the same time, I had New York City in my backyard. Like, and my mom took advantage of it, right? Like I went on a train and we went there. Like before I started playing classical piano, I had a tambourine. My grandmother was in the church and she was a beast with the tambourine. I think about my grandmother. My grandmother loved playing Scrabble, loved it. I was like, this is what old people do. All y'all do is just play Scrabble. I don't understand this. She loved Scrabble. She loved puzzles. And she said corny phrases all the time. She was a person that would actually say, it's raining cats and dogs. Who says it's raining cats and dogs? Like nobody actually says that, but my grandmother. Bless her heart, may she rest in peace. But I want to talk about this idea of differences as strengths a little bit more, a little bit deeper. I often think about growing up in Brooklyn. I think about this idea that before I sat in a law school classroom, my barbers held court in our neighborhood barbershop. They held court. They constantly like made a case in front of a jury of their peers about who was the best football team or who was the best like, basketball team or the prettiest movie star. And like, you can never even get your hair cut because they kept on turning off their clippers and doing all these shenanigans and antics. But like, it taught me that like evidence mattered, like rhetoric mattered, right? Like passion mattered. Like I learned how to maneuver. I learned how to use humor to teach people. There were scholars in my barbershop that didn't finish high school. Brooklyn, New York, Flatbush Avenue, YMCA. 2 years ago, I went there to play basketball. I played for an hour and a half. I did not even break a sweat. Why? Because every 5 minutes, there was a full-scale trial about whether or not that was really a foul. When I say trial, I'm talking like full-out reenactment of the scene of the crime. Like, you stand over there and do this, and you do that. I'm like, what is wrong with you people? But again, there was this demand of evidence, this idea of like, that's not right, that's not fair. All right, well, shoot for it. There's got to be some sort of objective measure to get to a resolution. And when I think about all of this, when I think about this idea of leveraging our differences as strengths, it means we've got to stop saying that stories like mine, becoming successful despite all of the struggles that I went through, that's not right. I'm successful because of it. And if we can get our kids to think about those things that make them different, it's like I'm an introvert, but because of that, I worked really extra hard at understanding like how to connect with people in ways that make them feel special and safe. I struggled with ADHD, but because of that, I'm super creative and I think about things in ways that other people don't normally think of. Like, it's because, not despite. And if we can claim that, if we can get our kids to get to that point where they piece this all together, where they start to say, like, you know what? There's a reason that as a teacher, I connected with kids like Anthony. Because in many ways, I am Anthony. I knew that story. That became a superpower. There's a reason when I graduated top of my law school class and worked at the big law firm in Vegas, because I knew how to play the game. I knew like how to read people. I knew what was really going on behind the scenes. And I was super creative because I grew up in a space where we had to be. The way my mom would stretch a $20 bill would make you believe she had magical powers. Like, how in the world could we buy all these things for $20? But she was a mad woman when it came to figuring out how to optimize constraints. And I talked to you about my grandmother. What did she like to do? My grandmother played Scrabble, loved puzzles, loved saying super corny phrases. So, because why wouldn't I be doing something super random like being on Wheel of Fortune? This is exactly a part of like a because not despite part that makes you completely question this idea of why we limit people to the idea of full potential. So as this is coming up, I want you to think about this. I want you to really start brainstorming in your head. What are the things that make your children unique? What are the things that they do that separate them from anyone else you've ever met? What are those superpowers that right now might seem like weaknesses, might seem like something that actually holds them back? But as you start looking in deeper, it doesn't hold them back at all. Take a look at this clip real quick. And this was from about 10 years ago. It's kind of a big file, so it's taking a little while to render. Coming up. And I see that somebody brought up the point when it comes to networking, it's not just in person, it's even on social media as well, which I love. But if this clip does go through, I just want to show you kind of the very ending of it. So at this point, I'm still in the classroom. I'm teaching in Las Vegas, and I went on this show. You know, I meet Pat Sajak and Vanna White, and because I am who I am, I'm very straightforward about the idea that I like joy. I like being excited. I like happiness. I like sharing that happiness with my children so that they can laugh at me years after the fact. Like, why is daddy so dramatic and ridiculous? It's because being dramatic and ridiculous is my because, not despite story. So as we wrap this up, and I had a chance to share this with you, so thanks for indulging all of this. I want to get to this idea of, again, thinking about we're beyond full potential. Full potential presumes a fixed point. There's nothing that is fixed about your kid's ability to be excellent. There's nothing that can stand in their way except for outdated notions of where they should stop. So as we wrap up and we move into the Q&A section, what I want you to do is think about, like, what are the two things out of the things we discussed, right? Like asking better questions so your kids can get in the habit of asking better questions of themselves, being explicit about those moments where it's very important that we teach our kids that it's more important to do right versus be right. Give them a chance to think about issues from different perspectives and how they might impact other people. Being super intentional about getting them to build out their networks, and then helping them to leverage their unique experiences, helping them to consider their differences as strengths. So think about, out of those, what two things can you start doing right away? And as you start thinking about those two things, between asking questions, being right versus doing right, analysis of different perspectives, networking, and unique experiences, right? Because not despite, I'm going to actually make sure that you have the information to get in touch with me again. Again, on Instagram, ThinkLawUS, at Colin Seale, and on Twitter, at ThinkLawUS, and at Colin E. Seale. That middle initial is kind of important because my little brother is also Colin Seale, but my dad had some issues that way. But if you want to follow us on that and interact on there and engage, I would love that. I do want to make sure that I'm able to answer as many questions as possible with the time that we have left. Would love to kind of see in the chat, people talk about like, what are the things that you are going to commit to out of what's here on this list. And with that, I'm going to look at some of the questions that have come in so far. So any book sources on how to teach kids to speak up and advocate for themselves? So I want to, there's a big part of my work that is really focused on the idea that parents ought to appreciate your expertise with your child. There is literally no one in the universe that knows your child as much as you. You know what makes them tick. You know what they like, what triggers their emotions, both positively and negatively. So like, let's not underestimate the power that you have to help model some of these things. So when it comes to advocacy, it starts at an early age. Like it starts early. Like the earlier you can do it, the better. And if there's one thing that I would say when it comes to advocacy, you have to realize if you want to raise a critical thinker, you have to accept that this critical thinker is going to get on your damn nerves in your house. Because the thing about a critical thinker is you can't just say, because I said so. There's no reality. There's no reality where you can ask a kid to be a critical thinker in school or out there in the world and then come to you and just be a compliant robot. It's not going to happen. So it starts by modeling it like in the house, like in the home, and then helping them work through tough things, but owning that solution on their own. Like maybe I can step back and let them advocate for themselves when it comes to a teacher or an issue in school or an issue with another child. Oftentimes when my daughter in particular has issues with people that are her friends, like we talk to the parents, like we let them kind of be aware of it just so we know what's up. But we want the kids to work it out because you know what? Us adults, we're done. We're done. We're done. Like we have not figured out how to like maintain a civil society. Our kids are our only hope with this, and teaching them how to advocate for themselves in appropriate ways is a big part of that. Other questions. Yes, I can send the folks at TAGT a PDF of this presentation so that it can be shared and looked. And like I said, a lot of this gets fleshed out a little bit more in my Thinking Like a Lawyer book, which is there on Amazon. When we talked about like an introvert, one that prefers to communicate via text, and helping them grow out of their shell. And this is something that like I think ties into this next question about at what age you teach your kids to network. One of the things that I always find interesting, and this is something that I explored a lot when I was a teacher, because think about like having 150 kids a day. You got your kids that are the academic rock stars that are gonna like, you know, you can put them in a corner and do crayons and like, it's like they don't even like need you. They're amazing, amazing learners that you gotta push and keep them like competitive, whatever have you. You got your kids that are like super loud and boisterous and high energy, you could deal with that. But I always struggled with kids that just were kind of like, man, it's not giving me anything. What I've realized is there's usually one thing in the world, at least one thing that gets that child super excited, super, like they can talk for hours about this one thing. It could be Pokemon, it could be whatever, but it's gonna be that one thing that gets them going. One of the things that I realized is that like giving our kids a platform for that early is a great way for them to understand like, oh, like I can do this. I have a good friend who was very socially awkward in college and he has about 60,000 Twitter followers right now because social awkwardness just kind of works for him. And a lot of people that he engages with struggle with the same exact reality. So giving our kids a space where they can be their authentic selves, where they can kind of lean into their strengths and interests. My daughter, during this shelter in home homeschool environment, has decided that she's going to start a podcast. It's going to be called Beating the Big Sister Blues, where every episode she's going to talk about some shenanigans of her little brother and give tips on how to deal with like little brother nonsense. Sometimes she's going to interview other people who were big sisters and get their advice and see what they say about the experience. And like, who knows? She might be the next influencer. Who knows? My daughter's a little bit extra. She's a little bit extroverted. But when you start listening to a lot of people that do these podcasts, that have these blogs, you start realizing it's their passion for this area that gets them to stand out more than anything. So figure out what that is. Figure out what problem your daughter wants to solve, and then use that as a hook to get them to feel more comfortable sharing. Other questions I have. What do you recommend for kids who are just okay and could be challenged more, but life and time? Who are in the just okay school? So here's the thing. I struggle with this. There's a lot to be desired in the school that we have in this country, no matter what. There's a lot of issues. There's a lot of challenges. So I would say that you have to understand that your child, more likely than not, is probably going to like not suffer extreme and utter failure in life because their school is just okay. A lot of people went to just okay schools and turned out phenomenally. I think that what has to happen is we've got to start remembering that like success isn't really about the school's ranking and their letter grade and how many stars they have. Success is about what your kid makes of the opportunities. Like that's what it comes down to. Like, how are you helping your child take advantage of opportunities that are offered? Somebody brought up the question about like sports. Well, let's go back to what I said earlier about like those so-called like soft skills. If you look at sports like boxing, you know, there's something that is like, aside from getting pounded in the head all the time, from the time a lot of these boxers are like 10 years old, everyone's calling them champ. It's about their development and it's like very self-centered. Team sports do a lot, like particularly for kids that are so used to being the absolute best academically, going to a space where they're not absolutely the best, it could be humbling. It can get them to appreciate like other skill sets people bring to the table. It makes them become a better communicator, a better listener, a better assessor of strengths and weaknesses and their own strengths and their own weaknesses. So I strongly recommend like sports, the arts. I can honestly say that for me, the arts was probably the most important aspect of my development as a learner. Doing musical theater, doing piano, doing dance, like all those things really helped me to like stay connected, just really get people the idea of like being able to read an audience, working off of a partner. Somebody forgot their lines, but I could kind of like work it out and we could get through the scene. Like there's something about that. Thinking on your toes, like thinking on the fly. There's value in that. So again, potential success, be as broad as you can. Think about all the opportunities you get to expose your kids to a chance to be excellent. Other questions. We talked about eye contact. Again, another sort of introvert kind of question. There's a big issue around like, how do we like create kids that can like work within the standards that we've considered as like normal, right? I would honestly say, I don't know. Like we're in a different time. We're in a different time where, to be honest with you, it could become more important for our kids that they know how to make eye contact with their video screen, with their webcam, than an actual like human body. I have an organization where I work with schools in 28 states. I'm not in these states all the time. I'm meeting via video conference or over the phone. Like, you know, I'm kind of shy in some ways. Like I don't actually like making a whole lot of eye contact in one-on-one conversations. Um, but you work within what's natural to you. One of the things that was really helpful for me is when I was in college, I did that career service stuff where you had to like take videos of you doing mock interviews and you realize like, ooh, that looks awful. And the competitor in me forced me to do that better. So I don't know if maybe doing some sort of a mock conversation and modeling that and taping that might give your child a little bit more insight, and they can fix that and improve on that, but it's not detrimental as we think. Here's a good question. If we bust the myth of meritocracy with our kids, are we undermining the idea of a strong work ethic? Absolutely not. I think working hard matters. I think working hard is still really important. But if we teach working hard as the standalone path to being successful, we are lying to children. We're just straight up lying to them. Even worse, we're setting them up for extreme disappointment where they'll be like, oh, I don't understand. I was more qualified for the job. But what they didn't realize is that the person that was less qualified already had lunch with the entire hiring committee for the few weeks before, already made phone calls to the CEO and the board members. Like, they put in that work behind the scenes when you didn't even know that that was a thing. So there's a game to be played. We cannot ignore that game. And again, it doesn't mean we don't have to work hard. And let's be real. For kids growing up in poverty, for kids growing up in certain minority groups, it's still the case. It's still the case that a lot of us still need to work twice as hard to get half as far. So like, I'm not playing when it comes to like, you need to achieve, like your life depends on it. But I can't stop there. That cannot be the be all end all. So this is an interesting one. As kids get older and become more independent, they have challenges. It's like they had it all together in high school, and all of a sudden it's like they don't know what they're doing. They're struggling, and they don't really know. I'm going to give you a very strong piece of advice for this, and some of it is a little bit harder. Some of it is a little bit harder as kids get older because they're already groomed this way, but it's not too late. One of the things I want each person on this call on this webinar to commit to is I want you to retire another word. While we're getting rid of full potential, you know what else I want to get rid of? Smart. Oh, you're so smart. Oh, Colin's so smart. Oh, Colin's basically a genius. Because here's the thing. Smart is funky. Smart is funky. If you tell gifted kids that they're smart all the time, it's strange. Because what happens when they're faced with a challenge? Do they all of a sudden, oh, this is hard. I'm going to keep on working until I figure this out. No, that's not what they do. They typically shut down. They give up. They don't even try. So I can tell you that like when I was in college and I was a computer science major, and I didn't realize that most people that major in computer science have actually coded before. I didn't. I just figured I could make a lot of money during the dot-com boom before it was a bubble. So I went to my first lab class and I didn't know what was going on, and all the kids were laughing, leaving so early because of how easy it was. And like, I gave up. I turned off my computer and I went home and I was crying. Like, I just knew I was going to quit. I knew I was going to drop out of school. I knew I was going to have to go back home to Brooklyn, leave Syracuse, and just give up on the whole thing. And I called my mom, and I don't really know why I called my mom. My mom is not the kind of person to give like motivational speeches. But I called my mom like, Mom, I can't do this. It's so hard. I don't know what I'm doing. Everyone is so easy. I don't even know. And she's like, Colin, look, you got to figure it out. You've always figured it out. I got to go to work. And she like hung up the phone. And I remember to myself, like, that little thing she just said, like, I got to figure it out because I've always figured it out. It reminded me that I've always been creative. I've always been very adaptable. I've always been very, been able to persevere and very resilient. I've always had an incredible bounce back game. So like, remembering these characteristics, remembering these habits of who I am, like, what I wasn't smart. Smart, take it or leave it. But like, knowing that I can bounce back from controversy and adversity, like that mattered. It mattered that I remembered that, because being smart almost paralyzed me. Because it's like, if I'm smart, this should come easy. So it's never too late to start telling our kids, you are resilient. You remember that time that you like lost the spelling bee that year and you studied all summer and we want to remind them of the moments where their work ethic, their commitment to the task, their dedication and passion pushed them through. So if you have a sophomore in college that's starting to struggle, that sophomore might need that sort of reminder. Anything I talked about with advocacy definitely applies to the same for middle school. I just maybe emphasize and underline that we'd want to make sure they understand how to do it and engage in a way that's not going to get them in a whole lot of trouble. Because middle schoolers can sometimes go a little bit out there. We got to make sure we teach tact. Tact matters. We don't get a lot of models in our TV, in our kind of entertainment world, and our like Twitter sort of like owning culture, but it does matter. It still does matter. There's still a place for this going forward. I got a question about homeschooling gifted children. It's kind of my same take on everything. Like any sort of schooling for any sort of child is challenging. Like homeschooling presents a whole new world of challenges. Teaching any sort of gifted child presents a whole lot of challenges as well. The main thing that I would say, because I imagine that, you know, every parent here is in a boat of like, whether this is what you do full time or not, like you are in a boat now where homeschooling your kids is a part of what you're doing. Try to figure out a way that, however possible, you can maximize the level of choice within some sort of reasonable boundaries. Like this week was my first week experimenting with my kids with like a choice sort of structure. And 2 days in, I feel like a genius. I saved myself so many meltdowns and like fights and like, you know, knock them out, drag them out sessions, because now they picked what they're gonna do for that block and it's good and it works and whatever. It's a work in progress. The stakes are not super duper high right now, but yeah, give it a shot, see what happens. The critical thinkers get mad easily. It's interesting. One of the things about thinking like a lawyer is, as a lawyer, you might go to court one day and you're banging on a podium about one particular angle of the legal case. And the very next day, you could be in court on a different case, banging a podium just as loud, but on a different set of issues, okay? How much more time questions do we have?
You have about time for about one more.
All right, so I will take one more. I'm just gonna scroll through because there's so many good ones here. All right, this is one that I haven't really seen before, and I think it actually matters. So the question is from Frank: how do I help my daughter, 10 years old, to accept kudos for a job well done? She can't stand praise when it's due. She's her own worst critic. So this really hits home. I wrote a LinkedIn post that went like super viral about this very issue. It was Memorial Day in 2019, and my cable went out of my house, and I was at the Starbucks down the road, and I'm sitting there with the free Wi-Fi, and I happened to like watch a woman doing an interview for a sales position, and she got asked the question of like, you know, like, so are you an organized person? And she's like, oh yeah, like I'm super organized. I color code everything. I've got all these things in spreadsheets. Actually, I mean, some people might even say I'm like too organized. I mean, sometimes I'm so organized, it's annoying and like whatever. And I'm like, oh, what is she saying? What is she doing? And like every time she had one positive aspect about herself, she found some way to like dig in and like find a negative way to look at that thing. And what I say is, in this world of like thinking about networking as a skill and like being able to like build ourselves up, like the world is tough enough for women in the workplace without women beating up on themselves even more. You have to believe in yourself. And if you don't believe in yourself, then just straight up lie to yourself like you do believe in yourself. And we have to stop being at the point where we feel like so worried that like the world is sexist, because it's not going to change. It's never really going to be a safe place for women to be able to show 100% confidence in their own abilities. So don't even worry about that. Okay, you do what you have to do regardless. You be proud of your accomplishments. You understand why you stand out, both your unique gifts and your gifts that basically show like you are the achiever, you have the credentials, you can do it. If my favorite thing about raising a daughter is the potential that she is going to be a badass that doesn't let that kind of fears hold her back. So go in, keep your thumb on that, and make sure that like she learns to be comfortable with the fact that she's amazing.
That's awesome. I love that that's the note we ended on. Thank you, Colin, for sharing your time and passion with our community. We really appreciated this time that you've been able to give us over the past couple of weeks being part of TAGT. If you haven't seen Colin's Facebook Live session, again, you can find those on our Facebook page under videos. He was our first one, which was fantastic, and has some really great practical tips about this situation we all find ourselves in, homeschooling our children, whether it's something you do full-time or because of the pandemic. So we really appreciate you, Colin. Thanks to everyone who participated this evening. We have recorded this webinar, as you probably noticed, and the recording will be available on our website, txgifted.org, this week. And I believe you can go straight to the webinar at txgifted.org/webinar. As we said before, this week we celebrate GT Awareness Week, and what a time to advocate for GT in Texas. We invite you to celebrate with us online as we bust myths, educate our community and the educational field in general, and highlight the amazing work your students and their educators do every day. Please follow us on Facebook and Twitter. TXGifted is our name on Twitter. You will receive a feedback survey to let us know what you thought about tonight, so please share your thoughts with us. Great feedback in the chat. We'd love to hear from you if you haven't done that already. Finally, today, TAGT is only able to provide resources like this one with the support from our members. Please consider joining TAGT to show your support for this organization and all the GT students in our great state of Texas. Our sincerest thank you, and we hope to see you soon. Happy GT Awareness Week.